The Lowe Post is brought to you by Goodyear, helping you discover the road ahead. Goodyear, more driven. Season 2 of the ESPN Investigates podcast is now available. The Running Man tells the story of an obscure former Olympian and alleged serial sexual predator and how a 14-month ESPN investigation brought him out of the shadows. More than 50 men were physically abused and mentally manipulated by their quote-unquote coach for over 40 years, and they banded together decades later to find justice. Subscribe and listen now to ESPN Investigates wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast on a Monday morning where I guess the NBA season is starting in a week, 10 days, whenever, some point much sooner than a lot of people expected a couple weeks ago, which means the offseason is here, and the offseason is going to be like everybody line up for the starting gun and just run really fast for as long as you can, and then you have a new basketball team and you have to start playing basketball games. And to digest a lot of this stuff, the guy at our shop who knows the cap the best, who knows the landscape the best, the one and only Bobby Marks. How are you?
Hi, Zach. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm gearing up for a mad dash. So let's just start there. Let's just do it. November 18th draft, free agency TBD.
I think like November 22, 23, somewhere around there.
72 to 96 hour turnaround between the draft and free agency. By the way, no, don't have a salary cap.
No.
Don't have a salary cap. Don't have a salary cap for the following season, which kind of matters when you're trying to spend money with a 2 or 3 year time horizon. So training camp starts when?
December 1st, maybe, right? 3 weeks of training camp?
That seems wildly aggressive. And then meaningful basketball games that count start December 22nd. By the way, people think free agency is over in like 3 days. For some players, that's true. There's always like 100 laggards who are signing 2 weeks later who then have to like pick up their life and start playing real basketball games that count in the standings like 5 days after that. So let me ask you this. Have you found anyone who works for a team? And I use that phrase very pointedly, works for a team, i.e. does not own or govern the team, works for a team, who thinks that this is who's excited about this timetable right now?
No.
I have not found one.
I had a GM text me, and it was early Saturday morning, like 7-ish. I was drinking coffee and basically like what the bank, December 22, and like all question marks, right? Like what? And it was like, I guess health and wellness basically has gone out the window, right? Like as far as what we're going to do, as far as back-to-backs or 3 and 4 and 5 nights, possibly, maybe. I don't know. We'll see what happens with the league schedule. And no, there has not been a one person that is gung-ho about this. But on the other end, the person said, like, eventually we got to get back to a norm from a financial angle. We got to get back to a normal July to June schedule. And we're all going to have to basically sacrifice big time here to hopefully do that for 2020. This is all about 2021, 22. I mean, this condensed period of time that we're going to go through is about getting back to some type of normalcy.
So let's actually just go there then. And by the way, I got a bundle of the same text. Like I had multiple people call me like, is what you guys reported true? And I'm like, I'm not in the business of just reporting random stuff that's not like just stuff that's not true. Yeah, it's true. December 22nd, I guess that's what they're doing. So everyone expects the cap number for this coming season to be 109, flat-ish, close to that, right? And it's a complex negotiation that I don't really care to get into the particulars. Yeah. What about the next season after that, 21-22? Because it's obviously a huge free agency class, potentially headlined by the 2-time reigning MVP. Teams are going to want to know how much cap space they have, what the luxury tax is going to be. What are we expecting in terms of guidance on that number before free agency? They have to have something, right?
Oh, you have to. Yeah, they're going to give a number for 2021, 22, and it's not going to be based off the revenue from 2020, 21, because if we did that, then it's going to be at a really low number here. But yeah, I think, when I'll jump around to two things here regarding this current season. The teams I've talked to have said that the cap will be no lower than 109. right? Like that is what they've been assured. It'll be no lower than 109, could be 111. Now, when it comes to 21, 22, teams are using 115 as the number right now. Now, I think that's going to be potentially higher because I think revenue for 21 and 22 gets back to some type of normalcy here. And that will certainly have what the league will use as a projection here. But yeah, 21 and 22 is huge because of the teams with cap space. The Giannis, what we don't know what will happen with Giannis sweepstakes. All these potential players that could be free agents, the Paul Georges of the world and the Kawhi Leonards of the world and the Victor Oladipos. I mean, 21 is loaded with free agents. And then it has to do with, Zach, as far as rookie extensions, right? Like the rookie extensions with Jason Tatum and Donovan Mitchell and Bam Adebayo, which is like the wild card of rookie extensions, not because we don't know what, he's certainly a max player, but his free agent hold compared to what his max number is, like a $15 million difference. So
in other words, in English, what you're saying is the Heat, to preserve cap space for a star free agent whose name rhymes with Schmanis, might prefer to say, Bam, hey, wait, we'll pay you the max. We're going to give you all the money we can give you, but just wait. And Bam might prefer to say, that's cool. Like, I believe you, but like, I want to see it. I want the money. Just give it to me now. And oh, by the way, they have the same agent. Bam and Giannis have the same agent, which is a wonderful small wrinkle in all of this. Well, let's just start going through this offseason, because this is what I wanted to do with you. I went through all my favorite option candidates, player option, team option, all my favorite extension candidates, and I wanted to go through some of them with you, what we think is going to happen. Let's start with the Lakers, because when you win the championship, you deserve to lead off the show. And no one has ever complained about too much Lakers content. It's never happened. So the Lakers have 5 player options for next season: Anthony Davis, KCP, Avery Bradley, JaVale McGee, and Rajon Rondo. I will go through and I will predict to you what I think is going to happen with all of them. Are you ready?
Yes, let's go.
Anthony Davis opts out of $28.75 million and re-signs with the Lakers on a 2+1, which will carry him back into free agency when he's played 10 seasons and is eligible for the mega max. Okay, that's one. Yeah. 2, KCP opts out of $8.5 million and gets the clutch and the deserved clutch payday after being maybe their third best player in the finals when it really mattered, and re-signs for something. I penciled in 12. He might say, hey, I see Danny Green making 15.4 next year. I want that. So I don't know if 12 is maybe pessimistic for KCP. Avery Bradley opts in to $5.005 million. That's a dicey one. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. JaVale McGee opts in to $4.2 million. Rondo has already reportedly decided to opt out, which is opting out of the minimum. Of course, he's going to opt out of that because the minimum is the floor that you can sign for. So those are my predictions. I want to hear if you think I'm right. And if my predictions are about right, the Lakers will have about $127 million in committed salary, including their draft pick and some veteran minimums and other assumptions I made. And then we can talk about why the luxury tax number is so critical to their chances of repeating next season. So what do you think of my predictions? I
think you're right on. I think with AD, I think you could probably make the argument maybe a 1-1, right? As far as kind of going the KD route. And I only say that because by doing a 1-1, which is, player option for 21, 22, is that what happens if there is a free agent out there and then all of a sudden LeBron, who also has a player option, both these guys opt out and maybe they take a little bit less out there from a salary standpoint to fit in a max type salary. So I only say the 1-1 route, but I think, yeah, you can make the 3-year contract with a player option, because then he's the 35% of the cap in 2022. KCP, I think he's going to opt out. I think he's probably going to look at what Danny Green earned and said, hey, I'd like that salary too. But I think his range is probably on a 1 year in that $12 to $13 million range. So I think
so funny. It's so funny how that happens with guys on the same team. Like, I'll bet you Bogdanovic, who's good and is going to have an enormous number of suitors, both the teams with cap space and teams that would love to trade with him, looks at Buddy Hield's number and was like, well, you guys decided to start me over that dude. Like that dude's coming off the bench. Jason Jones of The Athletic is reporting that dude's not even returning text messages from our coach. Like, how about you pay me the same amount as that guy? And first of all, Buddy Hield just returned the text messages, my man. You're coming off the bench earning $20 million. Give my buddy Luke Walton a text reply. That's all.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves, Zach. Nobody responds to your text messages. But yeah, it is funny that guys line each other up as far as what they earned the previous year when you go into free agency. But yeah, I think 12 to 13 for KCP. I agree with you on JaVale McGee. I think he will opt into 4.2 because I think he's probably a minimum guy. So he'd be losing
no brainer.
A buck, 1.5, and he would lose. Avery Bradley's interesting just because it's the $5 million number. I just think opting in. There's such a priority with the exceptions this year, right? I mean, there was only 4 teams really that have cap space, and teams are going to prioritize their 9-3 exception or their tax mid-level at 5.7 or their room mid-level. And I just don't see Avery Bradley getting more than what he currently will earn in 2020.
So the baby mid-level that the tax teams, that most teams spend because they're afraid of the big mid-level was 5.7 and change this year. So if Avery Bradley thinks he's getting that, you could argue he should opt out to get that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know the rules better than I do. The Lakers are probably, if they want him on their team, are probably rooting that he opts in because they don't have any kind of bird rights on him, right? They basically can't pay him. Yeah, okay.
120% off his 2019-20 contract. So you're probably looking at
I guess it doesn't matter to them. I guess they get him back either way. Okay.
Yeah, and that's even the same point with Rondo saying, I agree, he's going to opt out. It's the minimum. He at the worst, he can get the minimum on the table. The interesting with Rondo is though he's got early bird rights, right? So he's been on that roster for 2 years, so he can sign up to the average player salary, right?
It's about 10, right?
And they wouldn't have to use their part of their mid-level exception. The problem with early bird rights is that it's got to be for a minimum of 2 years. So that's kind of where, and without options aside, doesn't include the options. So that's the thing is do you want to commit 2 years to Rajon Rondo? That's the big question there. And I don't think you do, right?
Here's my answer. If LeBron comes and tells me to commit 2 years to Rajon Rondo because the dude just kicked ass in the finals, I'm like, you know what, Bron? Great idea. I was thinking otherwise. I was thinking otherwise, but you know what? I think that's a good idea. I think you're spot on. Let's work with me here, Bobby, because to explain to people why this stuff matters. Okay, luxury tax was projected at 139 million. Okay, 139 million. No one knows if I guess we don't know if they're just going to keep the luxury tax at that projection or keep it at what it was at this year, which is at 132 million. Yeah. This matters enormously to the Lakers, not because they need to avoid the tax and they're, oh my gosh, the financial, and they're Lakers. They're fine. People are very curious. Can the Lakers use the big mid-level exception, which is worth about $10 million a year, to get a real player who can make a difference to help their team? And the rule is, if I understand it correctly, if you use the big mid-level exception, or really anything that's $1 above the baby mid-level exception, you are prohibited from spending any more than about $6 million above the luxury tax. So if you're at 132 as the luxury tax, that means you can't spend more than 138, 139. If the luxury tax is there, the Lakers, I don't think, are going to be able to use the big boy mid-level exception. If the luxury tax is up where they had projected it when the world was not going down in flames, the world was already going down in flames, but just a new kind of flame happened. If the luxury tax is up at 139, so you can spend up to 145, they get the big boy mid-level exception. And the big boy mid-level, you can split it up. You can do lots of things with it. They'll get players, really meaningful players at that number. Am I doing all of that right?
You're right on it. You get an A for CBA language. Basically, once you use more than 5.7 of your exception, you will trigger the hard cap, right? That's what it is, and that is that $6 million apron that you had just mentioned there. So the teams you talk to, they are all lobbying for that higher tax number. They want 139. If you're the Players Association, you want 139. You want teams to spend money. You want the apron to be 145 so the Lakers can use the full mid-level, so the Rockets can use the full mid-level, so the Pacers. I mean, we can go on a list of teams here. But
it's cute that you think the Pacers are going to use the full mid-level to spend like way over the luxury tax or something like that.
No, I they are not one of my teams I'm even projecting to use most of their mid-level here. I think certainly for the Rockets that that would benefit because they're pressed. Even Milwaukee, right? Milwaukee's going to be, based on what they do with Ilyasova's non-guaranteed, they're going to be pressed up against that 132 number too. So now we all of a sudden Giannis wants the ownership to spend. Well, you're going to be restricted on what you can spend if the luxury tax apron is at 139. So yes, going back.
So who's rooting against it then? Who's rooting for nobody? Okay, so this is going to happen then.
Yeah, the four teams probably with cap space: Atlanta and Charlotte and Detroit. They probably say no, we want it at 132. We're going to get more money back from.
Right, those are the teams rooting against it because the more taxes that get paid, the more the teams underneath the tax they get all that money. So that's more money for them.
Yep. That's who would be rooting against it.
And so, I mean, if the Lakers have the full level to spend, we've seen LeBron's teams draw. I mean, people call them ring chasers, whatever. They're going to get in this market. That's going to LeBron in Los Angeles is going to get real players and really help their team. And I also think, I mean, from what I've heard, I think the Lakers are going to do their very best to see what they can get via trade too. And they don't have a ton to trade because they gave all their picks to the Pelicans. But, Kuzma's still there. Danny Green's salary is important. And I think, Danny Green has become this guy where when he's rolling, he kind of feels like an essential 3-and-D guy. And when he goes on a cold streak like he has in the past couple finals, he feels like, well, why are we relying on this guy? I think they'll sniff around and see what they can finagle, if anything. I mean, just like any team would do due diligence, right? I mean, I don't have any hard reporting on that, but it would just make sense to me. And certainly teams are expecting them to do that.
Yeah, and I think when you said that they're going to have a market of free agents, I think what's important is that here's an important stat. Last year, $1.1 billion was spent for the 2019-20 season alone, right? For free agency. That was for July and August. This year, we're projecting $450 million. All right. So the market, as much as we want to say, yeah, of course, if Davis Bertans resigns in Washington or Fred VanVleet, yeah, they're going to probably get a nice number. But what happens if Serge Ibaka wants to go out to, let's say, the Lakers for the mid-level exception and wants to take a one-year number and you take a potential pay cut? There's going to be Danilo Gallinari is another name. What happens if there's not a market for him, or if the market's just Atlanta, Charlotte, and Detroit, and Oklahoma City goes in a different direction? Then that is where that full mid-level comes into play.
Let's talk about Giannis because, we talk about extensions. That's the one that everybody wants to know about, the Supermax. I've already said that I would bet against him signing it this summer. Could be wrong. I think there's still optimism in some corners of the Bucks organization that maybe he will sign it this summer, and that would be a coup for them. And again, there's an argument that, when someone offers you $250 million, you should just take it. And, if you're unhappy a couple years later, demand a trade. Just take the money. I do think there's an interesting quirk that I haven't heard talked about a lot, that there's a lot of guys that are eligible for extensions all the time. A lot of veterans that are eligible for extensions that start at, varying amounts depending on what their salary is. A lot of those guys can sign those extensions anytime they want. So Monty Morris, for instance, can go. Gary Trent Jr. can go into the season, can be 40 games into the season. And we've seen this. I think Dylan Brooks was the last guy to do this, and sign a multi-year extension with their team anytime they want. Giannis is Supermax. It's a hard deadline. He either signs it before the season starts or he doesn't sign it at all until the following offseason. I think I get why that's the rule, why the rule is different for him. If he doesn't sign it before the start of the regular season, he's just not signing it, period, until the end of the season. I initially felt like that's a little bit unfair to the Bucks. Why should one class of player be able to sign an extension anytime they want? And the Bucks, let's say they start 25-2, can't go to Giannis and be like, see, we spent, our team is awesome. You want to just sign now? They can't do it. I understand why, but there is a little dissonance there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think the league and the PA missed something here, Zach, when they did that CBA in 2017 and they negotiated the Supermax and the deadline. I understand if you're a player who had earned Supermax criteria to sign an extension now, that you have a that day before the regular season starts. But for the case of Giannis, who has earned it, not just this offseason, but has already met the criteria for 2021-22 when he'll become a free agent.
Giannis could backpack around Europe the whole season and be eligible to sign the Supermax regular old contract, not an extension because his deal would be up.
Yeah.
This is what Steph Curry did, except for the backpacking part. And like, he's already qualified. He doesn't need to do anything else. There's no like, oh, if he does this season, he's already qualified.
Yeah, and that's why I thought if you qualify already for 2 years for this offseason next year, then you should have that window should be open, right? That window should go towards the end of the regular season, like let's say June 30th before the moratorium starts. That you should be able to do that. You don't have to wait until next offseason. I think that would have been that would have made sense for everyone. Like, why are we restricting that player who's already met the criteria in back-to-back years?
So here's why. They don't. When they were negotiating this deal, from what I was told by people all over this, that they decided we don't want this to hover during the season. Like, players of this caliber, like, no one is going to ask George Niang all year long, "Are you signing your extension? Are you signing your extension?" No one's going to ask Monty Morris or whoever, okay? But Giannis, every single game is going to be asked, if it were allowed, hey, the Bucks are 10-0. What do you think? Hey, 2-game losing streak. Does that affect your thinking? Like, where are you at today? And they decided that's bad for the NBA. And also, that scenario I outlined where what if the Bucks are 25-2 and Giannis just wakes up one day and says, I love this team. I'm in a good mood. We're on a 15-game winning streak. Let's do it. I think there's a fair argument to be made by the union and agents that's actually bad, that a player during the season is less able to step back and really think big. Like, there's a game tomorrow. There's a game 2 days after that, blah, blah, blah. Like that I get that argument. I do feel like the Bucks that little quirk disadvantages them a little bit, but I'm not sure that I should really care about that from their standpoint as much as I think. I get the reasons why it's not allowed, but if I were the Bucks, I would not be thrilled about it.
No, I mean, they're all valid. I get it. Like, you don't want this lingering, throughout the whole season. And, it's just so Giannis basically gets lumped in with the rookie extension guys and also guys who are veteran extension that have 2 years left on their contract. So those three categories are lumped into the day before the regular season starts. Everyone else, as you mentioned, the Devontae Grahams and the Monty Morrises and the Gary Trents, you can do it throughout the whole season, right up into the end of the year.
The 2 years out thing is an important note. So just to give you one example, Zach LaVine, in theory, is eligible for an extension already from the Bulls, but because he has 2 years left on his current contract, he'd have to sign that extension before the season starts. There's a bunch of guys like that. Let's turn to some more options. Ready?
Yep.
Gordon Hayward,
yeah.
Player option, $34 million. And when it's that high, you have to say million for Gordon Hayward. Million. Pre-pandemic, I think people underestimated the chances that he was going to opt out of that. Okay. Like, it was on my radar that, like, remember, it's like not unreasonable. It's a huge number. Not unreasonable he opts out for whatever reason, okay? Pandemic hit, and I exited out, so he's not opting out. You can't opt out of $34 million. It's $34 million. Like, we don't know what the hell the world's going to look like in 2 weeks or 8 days or whatever the timetable you choose here. Over the weekend, our old friend Ian Begley reported some interest in Indiana in trading for Gordon Hayward. And I will say there is just that report from Ian. I haven't spoken to the Pacers about it. I can't speak to its veracity. I trust Ian's reporting. It did hit a little bit of the zeitgeist, a mini zeitgeist of like, there's some buzz out there. And I can't figure out what the buzz means, but the buzz that I'm hearing is like the smoke indicating that something is happening. I'm not sure what's up, but I don't think it's a lock that Gordon Hayward is on the Celtics next year, whether that involves him opting out or whether that involves him opting in and Boston trading him. I don't know what is going to happen. The simplest solution remains that he opts in, and Boston really likes Gordon Hayward. They think he's a really important part of their team, and says, hey, you opted in, we're keeping you. We don't want to trade you for player X, Y, and Z that we can go through now. That's still the simplest route. But something is mildly afoot here. So take us through what the situation really kind of is and how it could work from like a real team mechanics perspective.
Yeah, and I think what his agent Mark Bartelstein's doing right now is canvassing the league. He's doing the Al Horford plan, right? Like last year, Al Horford opting out of $30 million. We're like, well, I don't know. And then he did, and we're like, well, he's got a home somewhere. I think there's a lot of different ways we can look at it here. If Mark Bartelstein can find a home for Gordon Hayward where he can get a 4-year, $100 million contract, and he is taking $8 million less this year, knowing that he's got $75 million guaranteed in years 2 to 4.
And by the way, $8 million less this year is not going to be really $8 million because of how much player salary is going to be shoved away from them into escrow anyway.
That's right. That is something that is going to be realistic here. So now you're thinking like, well, who are those teams? Now we know the teams with cap space, and it's Atlanta, Charlotte, Detroit, New York. I think Atlanta is a wild card in this whole offseason here as far as adding guys, veteran guys, trying to kind of accelerate the rebuild a little bit now. And how does Gordon Hayward fit in there at a $24, $25 million number? Because they've got the cap space to do it. I mean, they're in their position, not just this year, but for next year also here. So I think
they are yearning, Bobby. Yearning. They yearn like George Costanza yearns. They are yearning to get into the playoffs next year. Yep. They are like that number 6 pick. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but I know that one of the things that they have explored doing with it, as any team would do, again, is where can we turn this into a veteran who helps our team? Not saying that that's a Gordon Hayward trade chip. I'm just saying they are yearning to get better next season, and he would make them better.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think, you mentioned there's the cleanest way is just to opt in, right? 34/7, you opt in for the year, but then that leaves you exposed, right? Like you could be traded, like you don't have a no trade clause. You could be traded anywhere, right? Like you don't have your pick as far as where you're going. You could tell that team, hey, I'm not going to re-sign with you, but I mean, teams were willing to take you on, and hopefully you can convince you for the year. I think the other way, the third way is to the sign and trade route, right? You're opting out of that, and you're going to have to know. I mean, you're having basically an agreement in place before you opt out of that you are opting out of that contract, and you are going to get signed and traded to, for example, let's say Indiana, right? And it's potentially, let's say Miles Turner and I don't know,
some stuff.
TJ Leaf. Yeah, like just like a filler there. So you get
I think Indiana needs to go the other way and find a 4th TJ. I don't think they should trade any of their TJs. I think McConnell, Warren, Leaf. Is there another TJ? Is there a TJ in the draft? I think they need to go the other way and trade for Drew Holiday somehow. 4 TJs and 3 Holidays should be the goal.
That'd be a nice Christmas song, right? That would has a little rhythm to it. But yeah, I mean, so you're looking at the sign and trade route, and that's like that would be so. It's almost like the same thing as signing with the Pacers with cap space, but the difference is that Indiana is actually has to give up somebody to take back Hayward. That comes back to like how we started this podcast, the hard cap, right? Like. So teams that are acquiring a player in a sign and trade now become hard capped. So if you're the Indiana Pacers, you are hoping that luxury tax comes in at 139, so the hard cap's at 145, and it gives you that breathing room there for that. So those are going to be the different options. But basically, Zach, it's like a process of elimination for Gordon, right? Like you can take the 29 teams and you just whittle it down. You put it into the teams with cap space. You put it into teams that would basically be eliminated. Like Golden State is eliminated, I think, from the Gordon Hayward chase because of the hard cap. Right?
We don't know that there is a Gordon Hayward chase. Like we don't know that any of this is happening. I'm just saying that there's a little bit of buzz, and Ian Begley hit on it, I think, last week. So let's just play the game theory, okay? And again, I don't know that any of this is relevant, but if he wanted to leave, or if he just whatever for whatever reason, Atlanta looms as important, at least as a stalking horse, because if he wants to opt in and get traded, you need to convince the Celtics that your other alternative is I opt out and I have a place that I'm actually willing to sign. And most of these teams, if you care about winning in the next couple of years, are poo-poo. Okay, so but Atlanta, I mean, they're exciting, they're up and coming, they have Trae Young. I don't know, I just don't know if this is real, but you need to convince Boston I have a home if I opt out. So if I'm opting in, it's under the condition that you trade me to destinations X, Y, and Z. Again, I'm not reporting this is happening. I'm just saying the game theory, that's one way it could work and how Atlanta could be important.
Yeah, I mean, and basically what the message from the agent is that to Boston is that we're going to sign with a team like Atlanta. You will lose him for nothing, and you'll basically become you go under the luxury tax, and you get your $9.3 million exception. But that's basically it. That will be the consequences here. Where if you're the Celtics, you're saying, well, wait a minute, like how can it help us also and not lose that player for zero? So if you're the agent, you've got a team with cap space, and then you also have a team that's willing to take him on if it's a sign and trade, and you're guaranteeing that player $75 million for the last 3 years of the contract.
Just because it was fun, I went through some fake Gordon Hayward trades on the condition that he opts in, or in this situation that he opts in. Can I throw you some fake Gordon Hayward trades? The Indiana one you've already got. The problem with the Indiana one from Boston's perspective, the one that Ian Begley speculated on, which involved Miles Turner going to Boston, is that once Tatum gets his extension, Tatum plus Brown plus Kemba for the next couple of seasons that's like $90 million by itself. And so you add another $20 million player in there, it becomes pretty onerous for Boston. And, Hayward, at least if he opts in, they have the option of just sort of wiping their hands of it because he's an expiring contract after the season and trying to replace him at a lower dollar value amount. By the way, the same thing is happening in a couple other places, but places that just haven't won a lot. Like, does Indiana have the appetite to pay Brogdon, Oladipo, Sabonis, Turner, and then maybe Warren somewhere down the line? I'm not sure they really do. And that's one of the reasons why I think there's been so much focus on Indiana as a pivotal offseason team, right? There's been reports by other people, about Oladipo and Turner being some degree of in the ether, whether they're unhappy or Indiana's unhappy or whatever it is. And I think you look at Sacramento too. We can talk about all this stuff. De'Aaron Fox is up for an extension too. Does Sacramento want to pay Hield 20-something, Bogdanovich, whatever he gets? Fox will ask for a max. Surely I would if I were his agent. Bagley in a couple years. Oh, by the way, Harrison Barnes is still making $20 million. And that team has made the playoffs 0 times since dinosaurs roamed the earth. And do you really want to pay 100 plus? I think there's going to be some teams who are looking at can we trade? I just think teams are going to be looking to say, can we take 2 of those guys and turn them into one guy or something like that?
Yeah, it's almost like the one thing you don't want to do is have one of your guys that you want become a cap casualty on mistakes that you have made, or maybe not mistakes, maybe overpays from before. And yeah, I mean, in Boston, I mean, the salaries are just, that's the benefit of drafting well when you got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and then all of a sudden you got to give Tatum a max and Brown's on a close to a max, and then you got Kemba on a max, and now you're taking back Miles Turner on $20 million. I mean, that's like, that's the appetite that you have to have and we don't even know what the luxury tax in 2021 is going to be. So that's the appetite that you're going to have. But you're right. There's a lot of teams like that where the rookie extensions, when you have a player on a rookie contract, it's great for the first 4 years. I mean, you're making $4 to $5 million. Some guys are making $8 to $9, but you're tripling that number. And then when you compound it with Sacramento, with those salaries, with Bogdanovic and Hield and Barnes, and we'll see what happens in Bagley, then it forces you to pick which players you want to keep here.
A trade package that I'm paying attention to, just because in theory it makes a lot of sense, is Sacramento doing something with the combination of Harrison Barnes, Rashawn Holmes, and something else like a future first round pick or something to get. I mean, this was my theoretical like Hayward trade for them was something built around that. I don't think you'd put Bagley in that deal. I think the Kings are still trying to see what they have in Bagley. This is my theoretical, like, what if Rudy Gobert becomes available trade, which I'm not sure that he will at any point, but like something like that. And I will say this, like, there's this idea that Harrison Barnes is just toxic, like the salary is just a toxic deal and all that. Look, I think Harrison Barnes on a good team is a useful player. And his salary declines from like 22 to 19 to 17.9 or 18.2 or something like that. Like, it's not that terrible of a contract if he's in the right role. Because if he's in the right role, like, this is it. Like, he's a four who can play he can guard multiple positions. He's big. He shoots the spot up threes pretty well. The problem with Harrison Barnes in Dallas and at some points in Sacramento is just he's been asked to do too much offensively. I just think like that he's a decent basketball player that has been wrong through almost no fault of his own, been viewed as like this toxic asset. And I could see the Kings floating a package like that out there to see what they could get for it.
Yeah, it's basically when you make that type of money, and you're right. I mean, the contract goes down, 18.3 and 18.4 in the last year of that contract. When you're on a contract like that and you're on a lottery team, right? Basically, you become exposed, right? Like you become exposed where if he was on a Denver or one of these, playoff teams, the Clippers. Yeah, I mean, it's still a high number, but now he becomes a complementary part to either your starting lineup or coming off your bench. You're not relying on him to be your number 2 or probably even your number 3 guy.
I just think that's something I'm watching. Here are a couple places that I liked for Hayward. People will throw the Hayward for Andre Drummond trade out ad nauseum. Boston is not doing that trade. Okay, this is Gordon Hayward's just in 2020. Gordon Hayward is just significantly better than Andre Drummond, and they're both on expiring contracts. But what if you threw in Jetty Osman and a draft asset that the teams will haggle over? So I won't even speculate what the protections would be or anything like that. I think you're getting to the point where, okay, Boston, there's been all this endless noise that I frankly think has been overblown a little bit about how Boston needs a center, Boston needs a center, Boston needs a center. Well, okay, now Andre Drummond is a center who can do some things despite what I just said. Plus you get a couple other useful things like that's interesting. The other one I really liked the fit of Hayward in Portland. If I could make a deal with Portland that worked and Ariza plus Hood plus Zach Collins doesn't quite get the salaries there to the level that's legal, but it's close. And then if I'm Boston, I'm probably, because Ariza is going to be gone from me next year, Hood might be gone from me next year, I'm really just trading for Collins, and I have to be really bullish on Collins as probably my future 5 to make that deal, or maybe someone who can play with Time Lord. I might have to get a draft asset along, maybe a protected first-round pick or something along with that. I think that's an interesting one, but I couldn't make it work, Bobby. I couldn't crunch the old numbers.
Well, it works if you did the sign and trade route. It does work. If you have Hayward at, like, let's say 25.
Oh, I signed him for less. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's say you have him at 25 and you add, with those, with Hood at 6 and Collins at 5.4 and then Ariza at 12.8, and Ariza contract would have to become guaranteed now to make the money work. You're there. I mean, that's just a matter of from the sign and trade, and I think Portland would still be all right from the hard cap with that flexibility there. From opting in at 34 and change, yeah, you're going to have. I think you got to. What did I tell you? You got to get to about 28 million there, so you're a little bit short there. But yeah, from a sign and trade, and remember, sign and trades, it's got to be a minimum of 3 years on a deal. First year's got to be guaranteed. So anything after that, you could finagle how you want to protect the money. But from a sign and trade, if you can make the money work on those 3 guys.
I don't really know. I need to do some canvassing on what the league at large thinks of Zach Collins, because I was really excited to see him play this year after how I thought he was really essential for them in the playoffs in 2019, whenever the hell that was. He only played 11 games this year due to injury. He had the shoulder thing and I think something else I'm forgetting. I was really intrigued with him coming into the season, and if he can get that three to a point where he's never going to be like, an elite 3-point shooter, but like if I can be Brooke Lopez or something, like then he becomes a really interesting player. And I could just see Portland, Gary Trent really emerged from the playoffs. I think Gary Trent's really good. Is he big enough to be my starting three? Is that enough? Am I getting in a West that is going to be an absolute bloodbath next year? Where like the Portland's not even guaranteed to make the playoffs next year, let alone get deep into the playoffs. Do I have enough juice that way? And if I can get Hayward, I can play Hayward some at the 4 with Trent at the 3. I can start Hayward and, somehow find another power forward in Nurkic. I just feel like Portland has a move to make. I also wonder if like they've been linked mostly through speculation, frankly. I don't know how real it's ever been. I'm not convinced it's really ever been that real, frankly. But they've been linked a lot to Aaron Gordon. And the CJ McCollum for Aaron Gordon fake trade has been an NBA Twitter favorite. I don't think that was ever even like remotely real. I don't think there was a phone call in which that was discussed in any real way. But I wonder if Gordon's value has dipped to the point, and I do think it has dipped despite a nice run after the All-Star break for him. If it's gotten to the point where, again, you got to be a big believer in Zach Collins or Anthony Simons or somebody like that. If Portland could get him without trading either Dame, obviously CJ or Nurkic, I like that. I just think Portland has a move to make that makes their team click a little bit for next season, and I think they need to click a little bit with given how good the West is going to be next season.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost taken what we talked about Hayward. It's Zach Collins and Ariza, and probably you got to probably give him a pick, right? I mean, that money works there, and you're right. I mean, if this Portland team, they're not guaranteed, not in the Western Conference, they're not guaranteed anything if this whole roster returns, and we don't know what's going to happen in Whiteside or in Carmelo. We'll see what Rodney Hood's timeline is from that Achilles that he had there. But you do get a full year of Nurkic that you're not guaranteed to be in the top 8 here. So what are the two pieces or one piece that can go out and get you something? And if you remove Lillard and McCollum and likely Nurkic off the board, your best available asset after that is Zach Collins.
And the Anthony Simons disappointed, I think, last year. I still think there's potential there. Portland still likes him, and they should. But he's not the sort of golden jewel that they conceived that he might be at this point a year ago. I don't know that anything's happening with Gordon Hayward. Again, I should make that clear. There's just been some buzz in the ether, and Ian Begley's report kind of blew that up on Friday. Shout out to Ian. And I think it's just something that I would be monitoring and will continue to monitor. But again, the simplest solution is Boston really thinks Gordon Hayward is good, and he is. The simplest solution is he opts into $34 million, and they say, okay, you're on our team this year. We'll figure out the rest later. Let's see how the year goes. Could go one way or the other. There are two guys that I want to talk a little bit about. Why don't we go with Rudy Gobert? Eligible for the Supermax this summer. That's a lot of money for Rudy Gobert. Friend of the program, John Hollander, said it would be quote-unquote nutso for Utah to pay Rudy Gobert the Supermax.
The only thing I would say about that, though, Zach, is with the Supermax, and I think it's kind of – we always think it's like, oh, it's got to be 35. Yes, it's got to be 5 years, right? An additional 5 years in the contract, but it doesn't have to be the full 35%, right? Like you could go 32% and work your way down and be creative and do all that stuff. You don't have to just say, here's $240 million, take it. Like there's a ways to get, of course you got to have his agent sign off on it, but there's ways to go about, being creative as far as with that 35% number.
It's a very good point, and I think it hits it. What I think is the most likely outcome is that the two sides find a contract that works for them. And maybe I'm being Pollyannish about it. Maybe Utah is going to be just super cold and calculating and say, let's see what we can get. But I just, this is a team. Gobert's only 27. It's not like he's, this contract, whatever length it is going to take him perfect timing, right through his prime. He's still a top 10 defense almost unto himself. I think the degree to which he's been quote unquote played off the court in the playoffs has been wildly exaggerated. To me, the limitations in his game that I'm more concerned about are on offense. I'm not concerned about, oh, he gets played off the court by AD at the 5, this and that. Like, yeah, I'll deal with that in the playoffs. It's the offensive limitations that are more constricting to me and the kind of players I can put around him, which is why I think Utah just went all in with shooting around him last season, which I thought was smart. I just think they're going to say, look, we've won one playoff series in post Gordon Hayward, which is good, but like we just haven't we've been this nice team. Everyone's excited about every year. We make all these smart moves. It just hasn't amounted to much, and maybe it would have this year had Bogdanovic been healthy. Okay, but I just think they're going to say, I don't think we're hungry to take trading Rudy almost no matter what is going to be a step back. I don't think we're psyched about taking a step back. I bet they can find a deal here. That's my prediction. Again, these are just predictions. This is not like I'm 70% certain or anything like that. I just think that seems the likeliest outcome.
And what's interesting with Rudy is that although there's a deadline, as we talked with Giannis about that, the day before the regular season starts on a Supermax extension, he's also extension eligible for 120% off his number,
which is $26 million. So whatever, that's probably about $30 million, right? So
yeah, you just can't do the full 5 years. You can add up to a 4 year, additional 4 years. So you have the whole year to kind of work that out. If you feel like you're up against the clock, especially how this is going to go. And if the deadline, let's say, is December 21st, you have, the next 5 or 6 months to get a deal done for a regular extension with him.
That makes a lot of sense. I also think almost all of these things we're talking about are connected to Giannis, because to me, one of the more not obvious, but one of the destinations that if you look at it in a certain light makes sense for Rudy Gobert is Dallas. I actually don't think I would do it if I were Dallas, even separate from the Giannis cap space thing, preserving cap space for us. I still don't think I would do it unless the price came to. I just don't. I think Porzingis is going to have to play a lot of center, so I just don't think I would do it. But they're a team that people nominate as a Gobert team, right? Screen and roll with Luka, stabilize a defense that was slightly below average and kind of was their undoing against the Clippers. I get it. I just don't know that I would do it even separately from the Giannis thing. But given the Giannis thing, they have to be careful with their cap space. And so, like, if he were to take himself off the board, if Giannis takes himself off the board by signing that Supermax, then I think Dallas is a team where a deal like that, not necessarily for Gobert, but something that eats into their cap space becomes a lot more likely.
Yeah, because let's face it, like realistically, when you look at 2021 free agents, I mean, the likelihood is that most of these guys are going to go back to their the Paul George, unless things really implode in Los Angeles. Like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard forced their way to the team they wanted to play for. LeBron in LA, like those three, with those three guys, they likely will not be free agents unless things get really haywire here. So the market starts to shrink a little bit as far as what the players are. And when you have $30 to $30 million burning in your pocket, and you've got Luka up for a rookie, still under his rookie scale contract, which doesn't start until 2022 for his extension, then you are going to be an aggressive route. And that's the big question now can Gobert and Porzingis play together?
I mean, they could. There's no question they could. I mean, KP's played a lot with screen and dive guys. Is that the optimal way to spend, $60 million combined? It's in a league of finite resources. I just don't think that it is. And screen and dive guys have done amazing under Rick Carlisle. I mean, he's a magician with Dwight Powell and Tyson Chandler and on and on. If you could, Salah Mejri had moments there. If you could screen and dive, Rick's going to make use of you. But Porzingis can do that too if he wants. And so that's just not where I'm going. Interesting player option. I want your prediction, Bobby Marks. Evan Fournier, player option, $17.1 million.
Opt in. I have him as a $12 to $14 million player. He's a good player. I just don't see the market. I don't see Atlanta paying up. I don't see Charlotte. Would New York take a swing on him? Detroit. It's hard for me to to see a non one of these cap space teams going out. And
how aggressive do you think the Pistons are going to be? Because they've been most often linked to Fred VanVleet.
Yeah.
They need a point guard. Toronto's right there. Both cities are cold. Obviously, the Raptors are going to be, God only knows where they're actually going to play next year. What's your vibe on how Detroit is going to spend its cap space?
Yeah, I think my vibe is that they're looking at a prime opportunity with not many teams that they are competing against to take advantage of it, where if they don't do anything, right, if they take a conservative approach, then what happens is in 2021, now we got like 12 teams, right? 13 teams maybe with cap space. Now they're in this big, this big pond of, all these fishes here. And, if you listen to what this is a hard thing with Dwayne Casey, is that I don't know if Dwayne Casey is built for a major retooling where you're basically going to keep on preserving cap space year in, year out. Like eventually you get tired of that, and you want a win now, or at least a playoff now mode, I think. But then you have Blake, right? Blake is the wild card here. If you have a healthy Blake Griffin, and if you can go out and get Fred VanVleet, and we'll see what happens with Christian Wood, who is kind of that, I don't even know if he's an under radar free agent who probably will get paid this summer. Then you probably have the makings of, maybe a back end playoff team, possibly.
But don't get me too excited, Bobby. I don't want to get too excited. Get a little jumpy.
Back end playoff team doesn't excite you?
Hey, look, the Pistons are one of the I'm going to stop there. At least during the pandemic, no one can make fun of the Pistons' attendance. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know what they're going to do. They could just say, one of the things we can do as one of the only teams with cap space is we're in a deep, deep rebuild, to your point, right? They could go that route despite Dwayne Casey's presence, despite Blake Griffin's presence, and say someone is going to want to dump us a contract and attach maybe a first-round pick for it. I don't know. We're one of the only, I think Atlanta is going to use its cap space to try to win. I think Charlotte's going to use its cap space to try to win. New York, I don't have as good a read on. We might be one of the only teams that can take a large salary dump, that can absorb someone dumping a large salary onto us and get a good asset for it. Maybe we'll do that. That's demoralizing for some of the fans and the guys who are there. And Fred VanVleet, he has a veteran's game. He's been around the playoffs. He's only 26. And he's good. Fred VanVleet's good. That's one guy that I wouldn't necessarily rush to take myself out of that just because I have this ideal vision for we should be in asset accumulation mode. That's what the smart teams do, but let's be a smart team. Yeah.
I think you can go I guess we could put Fred in for this year's group, the A-list free agents. I think where you get in trouble is, Zach, when you miss out on the A-list free agents, and then all of a sudden you're taking that cap space and you're piecing it with role players on 2 and 3 year contracts. I think that's where and then it takes you out of the asset accumulation business. New York has the flexibility because they can just wipe the slate clean with all those guys they signed last offseason, with the Reggie Bullocks and the Wayne Ellingtons and the Bobby Portis. But what happened with New York was they spent all that money in 24 hours, where basically when the Andre Iguodala trade happened to Memphis, they didn't have any money to take his salary on. Memphis was sitting in a perfect position. They had that, I think they had that big trade exception to be able to take it, and they got a good draft pick with it potentially. So I think you can't be in a rush just to go out and spend that money when you missed out on your number one and even your number two guys.
You think the Warriors trade their pick? Speaking of the Warriors,
Sorry
to put you on the spot.
No, I think if I was Golden State, I would trade my pick and I would move back in the draft to build out my bench. I think if I can get 2 good players or 1 good player or maybe even a starter, and if I'm going from 2 to 8 or 2 to 9 and do something like that, I think that's more of the realistic. Do I think number 2 can get you a A-list all NBA type player? I don't. Could it get you it 6 months from now and that number 2 pick all of a sudden blossoms into this stud? Potentially, but that's kind of the risk that you'll that's the risk that you have to go with.
Yeah, I did this with Simmons last week where I threw out some fake Warriors trades, and most of them, all of them, I think were of the trade back for veteran help plus future assets variety. And so one of the ones I pitched was number 2 to Sacramento for 12, a top 5 protected future Kings pick, Bjelica and Holmes, thinking that those two guys, and I said the sense I had gotten was that Golden State would laugh at that trade. And I kind of, as much as I like it in theory, I kind of get why. Because when you really break it down, 12 is 12, right? Like my expectation for number 12 is like, if I got a rotation guy out of that, like that's probably pretty good. Bjelica and Holmes, like, let's be honest, they're just not going to be a much long-term import to me, right? Those are like win the title this year guys. Like they might not be on my team in a year. Future Kings pick, it sounds good. It's usually been a good thing to have. Not sure what it amounts to. And so like, is that really enough for number 2? Is that like, what of meaningful permanence is going to be on my roster if I make a trade like that? And compared to the permanent meaning or long-term meaning of if I just take whoever is there at number 2 and see what that player looks like in my system, what his value is at the trade deadline, if like a Bradley Beal becomes available or something like that. So I get that. I even think a trade back thing is going to be, unless they just love it, unless they're just dead on sure, this guy we can get at 9 or 8 or 7 is like a stud. That's our guy. We think he's better than LaMelo and Wiseman or whoever. I think trading that far back, I get why. I kind of, the more I thought about it, the more I kind of get it. Which is why I still think flipping spots with Charlotte. And if you think the guy you really want is going to be there at 3, but if the guy they want is Wiseman, then Charlotte's just going to be out of luck because they can't move up to get Wiseman then, unless they move up to 1.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I wrote about, and I just really wrote about it because from a financial sense was, taking 2 and going to 10 and seeing what Kelly Oubre's availability is. Right. I mean, he's on an expiring. Is he, what happened in Orlando? Does it make him more available as far as with the play of Bridges and Johnson? But that is a monster tax bill, man. That's like a $70 million hit on taking Kelly Oubre back.
And but if those guys help you win,
yeah, it doesn't matter.
Like you have Curry, Clay, and Draymond. Those dudes took you to 5 straight finals. With 2 of them with Kevin, or 3 of them with Kevin Durant. But they deserve your all-in commitment into their early to mid 30s. They deserve it, and your fans deserve it. And even if all I care about is all I have is a craven addiction to what my public image is. Like if you just bite the bullet and spend whatever that tax bill is to try to win, I think the goodwill from the fan base, I think people are going to understand. They just made a huge commitment during a pandemic. We just built this gazillion-dollar arena. No one can even go to it. They're not getting any revenue from that or whatever they're getting. I don't know. Like if all you care about is being showered with goodwill from your, thank you, like that, then spend the money. Do it now. You're trying, but I think on an ethical, not ethical, but I do think they owe Steph, Clay, and Draymond a good, honest shot to compete for the championship in the next couple of years. And by the way, Clay's coming off an ACL. Draymond's coming off a down year for him. We'll see how much of that was age and how much was just, I'm not super psyched about getting like Jordan Poole open for DHOs. And Steph is coming off a year away, which could be great for him. Could be great. All these dudes could be rejuvenated. They've just missed a lot of wear and tear after 5 years of super wear and tear. But in the West, those 3 guys, they're really good. They made the finals without KD the last time we saw them, and they were damn near going to take Game 6 from Toronto before Clay got hurt without KD. But in the West is tough. Like they could use a little injection of something.
Well, and that's why I'd be stunned if that $17 million trade exceptions or some of it is not used at all. I mean, that is their, besides the number 2 pick and that Minnesota, that's probably their 3rd best non-player trade asset, right? Like, and you have we're talking about this shortened offseason. Like, man, that thing's gonna expire at the end of November. I mean, if we get free agency starting in November 22nd or 23rd, I mean, that thing will probably expire on November 30th. So you have a small window basically from the draft. You have like a 12-day window from the draft until basically when the moratorium, whatever the moratorium is going to be when it's lifted.
Let's do maybe one or two more rapid fire. Extension eligible, Victor Oladipo. What is your prediction, Mr. Marks?
I think Indiana will put in the most they can offer him. I think it's 4 for 113 on the table. It's
Holy smokes.
Yeah, that's it. That's it, because it's 20% off. His number's so low. I mean, he's making what, 21 million? So it's 20% off that number. Yeah.
So there have been reports that Victor Oladipo is unhappy. He has refuted those reports. They have not gone away despite his refutation of them. He's been the most popular trade machine in the league in the last 6 months. I was going to say, you spoiled it for me. I was going to say, if I'm his agent, and it has been reported by me and others that for a hot second at the beginning of last season, the two sides broached the possibility of an extension and it didn't go anywhere. If I'm his agent, I'm looking around at the market, looking at how he's played since a horrific injury, no fault of his own. I'm trying to get back to the table for an extension again. And it seems from the public narrative that bridge is burned, and that would seem unlikely. I would not be shocked if they're back at the table. Let me just say carefully again what I said. I would not be surprised if they somehow got back at the table. And if I'm his agent and they offered me what you just said, I'm signing it on the spot.
113 million is hard to turn down when you're coming off that injury. And let's face it, he was not. I mean, he's still coming into form. And there's no guarantee at all in 2021, whatever the cap is going to be. And if he has a subpar year, that $26 to $27 million is going to be on the table from him, from Indiana or from another team. So, yeah, I would agree with you there that if that number is there and I am content in playing with the Pacers, then I got to give that a hard look.
Well, Miami was the hot name because Miami is Miami. They're Miami. They get big fish. They're slated to have this cap room.
I get it, but I don't know if they're that's a little bit. I think it's just because it's the All-Star, it's the name. Like
I said was because even if there was ever an is to the was, I just made the finals. I'm good. Like I'm good. You know, I made the finals, and right now there's some questions about Victor Oladipo in terms of how he's recovered from an injury. I'm good. Like I've moved on.
Well, even if I was Brooklyn, like I wouldn't entertain Karis LeVert and Jared Allen for him. Like I don't know if I'm willing to. I don't even know if I'm willing to go that route.
That's a hard no for me.
For that. I mean, then I got to pay the guy. Like, or I got Karis on for the next 3 years, and Jared's on will be extension eligible. That for me, that's a no. Also,
I'm starting to get talked into LeVert as the centerpiece of a Drew Holiday deal. I've said before that I think the Nets would hope to aim higher with LeVert. And I've said that LeVert as a centerpiece for Beal, you throw LeVert in a lot of stuff to get Beal. That's easy. Yeah. Pelton is all in. Kevin Pelton has written he would do LeVert plus stuff for Drew Holiday now. I've been a little less sanguine about that trade from Brooklyn's perspective, but I may be guilty of liking Karis a little more than I should as a player. I'm starting to get talked into that because I do think Drew Holiday would fit that team really, really well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been probably more against LeVert moving. I thought he could. I think he could be that third guy. But I love Drew Holiday, man. I think he is a heck of a player, and from a defensive standpoint, and if you can figure out something long term, and he's still in the prime of his career, you need one of those type guys, those all NBA level defensive players, especially when we get towards the playoffs here. So I think you could talk me into Drew Holiday. You could talk me into Bradley Beal. I'm not so sure anything after that you can talk me into.
Drew Holiday is a tough discussion in the conference room because I do think everyone focuses on the skill overlap between Karis and Durant and Kyrie. Like, well, they don't need someone like Karis wants to isolate and score the ball and run pick and roll. And his catch and shoot three is like, way below his pull up three, which is weird in terms of accuracy. It's not a great fit. I think that has been overstated. Like, all that is true. On the other hand, as KD and Kyrie age a little bit, and by the way, both of them, Kyrie's been injury prone a long time now, and KD's coming off an Achilles tear. Like, I'm not sure that I don't want a guy who does what Karis LeVert does as my third guy. And he's a little more reliable with the ball than Drew Holiday. He's a couple years younger. Like, I'm not sure that line of thought leads me necessarily to rush to make that trade. But Drew Holiday is a cleaner fit. The other issue is like Drew Holiday's has 1 year left after this
player
option.
Yeah.
He's wherever if he ever gets traded or if he stays in New Orleans, he's asking for an extension. And that's another guy on my list, right?
I said and I think I wrote about it when they did their offseason. It was like, if I'm Jason Glushon, his agent, if I'm looking for an extension, I'm looking at like Kyle Lowry type, like 3 for $90, right? When Kyle signed that deal in Toronto, what was that in 17? I think that his contract, like that's probably what I would be looking for, is that type of number.
I've heard that comparison before. I think that's like Granny Smith apples to Macintosh apples or something. I just think Kyle's a little better. And even then when he signed it, he was better. Yeah. He wasn't a champion then, but I think he was better. An easier fit because of his shooting with lots of different kinds of players. That's a lot of money for Drew Holiday. That would scare me just a little bit, and I'm not sure what the appetite is to give him that contract. I get the comparison. I get it. I would certainly, if I were representing him, I would certainly be making it. Kyle Lowry would be unbelievable in Brooklyn. Even with Kyrie there, it'd be unbelievable anywhere. It'd be unbelievable wherever you want. That's why the Raptors are going to keep him and have kept him. All right, we've hit a lot here. We don't have a lot of time here, Bobby. It's Halloween week.
Well, the good thing is, Zach, we're still in the transaction moratorium. So on the time this podcast comes out, it won't be, nobody will be traded, we think, right?
When that moratorium, I've never had any Red Bull ever in my life.
Well, I always said 2011 will be the closest. 2011 will be the closest. Remember post-lockout when basically like we were still all learning how to the CBA. Like, hey, here's the CBA. We've got a conference call in an hour, and you can go sign guys, right? Like we had training camp, and guys were like, "Who's that guy? Oh, it's Sean Williams. Yeah, we just signed him to a 2-year deal." Like you're just rolling guys in here, and when that moratorium lifts, whoo, good luck.
Yeah, I've never tried Red Bull. It seems disgusting. I also have a little bit like I have a little bit of like I'm a habit former in terms like I like routines and I get in my habits. So I have to be very careful of what I select as my habits. Like it's a very good thing I never smoked a cigarette in my life because I probably would have liked it and become a smoker. So I'm afraid if I try Red Bull, I'm just instantly become addicted to it and it will ruin my entire life. But when that moratorium lifts, it's going to be just complete madness. It's going to be, but no one's been able to make a trade for a long time.
Deadline. Yes, it's the deadline, February.
I'm getting the shakes already. All right, Bobby Marks, you got to go. Your stuff is always fantastic on ESPN Plus, and we're lucky to have you. I hope your family's well, and I hope to see you soon in a non-digital virtual form at some point.
Thanks, Zach. This was fun.